Alright, back to the F250 7.5. So this rebuilt engine, remember yesterday when we were cranking it at 0 compression? I mean, it sounded like the starter wasn't engaging. That's definitely a big variable. So let's say, you know, the rings aren't seated and there's massive blow-by through the PCV. It would basically act like an EGR problem where the intake manifold would see too high of a pressure, and that would actually inject too much fuel and follow the spark plugs. That's exactly what we're seeing here. So my plan is I dump 10 gallons of gas into it. Let's take it on some more another test drive, do some accelerations, see if this engine will get any better. So right now I have the PCM fuse pulled, this one right here. So injection is disabled. I just want to crank it and listen to how it sounds. Do we have compression? Alright, here we go. Let's listen. So it was. I think there's one cylinder that's a little low. So while it's cold, let's actually throw a scope on there, do a relative compression, see which cylinder it is. We know the firing order, and then we'll run it, see what happens, do a hot relative compression test, kind of go from there. So unfortunately there's no easy way to disable fuel while keeping spark, but here's just the cranking starter current, and the humps are fairly even. I put the cursors on every 8th pulse that was a little higher than the rest. So usually the pulse before that is a low pulse. So, and it speeds up, then has a hard time getting through the good cylinder. You can see it falls. So you start with a high pulse right here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So kind of fall, back up, and back up. So perhaps one of these, or this one right here, right before the high pulse, is our weak cylinder. But let's take it for a drive and then do a hot relative compression. All right, let's fire this bad boy up. We'll see if it runs any smoother than yesterday. So here it goes again with its loping. I'll pull up some live data, see what's going on. It's really not happy when it's warming up. Bop. By the way, all the ignition waveforms look pretty good. The truck is definitely shaking badly. Let's look at some live data. So you can see right now this engine is terrible engine vacuum, 120 hertz. Key off is 156. There's the pulse width. I'm sure we're still in open loop. Yeah, it's just running pig rich right now. Look at that, 14 milliseconds pulse width. If I rev it up, our pulse width goes down to like 10. It's stalled out. Okay, let's see what it cranks like. So So this engine loses compression as it's warming up. Just like it did yesterday, something's really, really wrong. It's cold, I mean, right now it sounds like the starter is just spinning and the engine's not turning over, but it is. Wide open throttle. Wow. I'm gonna warm it up again until it gets happy, but this sucks. So I unplugged the map sensor completely. Let's see if there's a default strategy that check engine lights on right away. See if this sucker will at least idle for us. It's a lot happier. No compression. Nope. See if this pulse width will stabilize to something a little more reasonable. So driving without the map sensor is not fun. The transmission shifts super harsh, default strategy, but it does go into closed loop. Minus 23% fuel trims there. Here's the injector pulse width, 5.6 milliseconds. That's known good. Obviously the RPMs are a little raised because it's in limp mode. So let me plug that back in, we'll keep driving. Let's listen to this thing crank with the ignition disabled. Yeah, pretty even, not bad. So what I'm noticing is at idle, you see the fuel trim drops all the way to minus 23, and only then does the oxygen sensor even think about switching lean. It's way too rich at idle. We're at 108 on the map, so I'm gonna write that down and see what could be causing this. We still need to check fuel pressure, ignition timing, and any vacuum leaks. I'm going to raise the RPMs just a hair. See the fuel trim going down, 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 down. It can't go any lower, and our oxygen sensor is still stuck rich. We're at about 4 milliseconds on the injector pulse width. So I'll save that data. And we'll do those few basic checks. So the stalling is definitely due to rich condition, because look at this pulse width. If I rev it up, it goes to like 20. Yeah, it's pretty nuts. So what could be causing this? Everything is due to too much fuel. Alright, back to the Ford F-250. Let's get some hard numbers off this engine, see if the low compression is causing the excessive rich condition, you know, especially on the warm-up. So, fuel pressure gauge connected. I got that on the windshield. Just want to monitor fuel pressure. Spec is, we'll look up the spec, it's like 35 psi. Then I have a pressure transducer teed into the map sensor. I want to see if this map sensor is reporting accurately. That's another variable. And then that's connected to my PICO scope. We also have a scanner so we can get scan data, the hertz on the map sensor. So basically check all the basics on a cold start. Once it warms up, we'll do ignition timing check with a timing light and kind of go from there. Alright, so first, let's see if our fuel pressure builds to something appropriate. Yep, it maxes out at 40 psi. It holds above 35. That's the spec. Our pressure transducer is at 0 inches of mercury. I'm using the vacuum transducer from the old kit. And then let's go into data and pull up our basic data here. Now, these map sensors, here's a conversion table from frequency to inches of mercury. So when you're in, when your engine's not running, the baro reading should be about 156 because we're at 1,200 feet. 159 is at sea level. When we're running, we're like 18 inches of vacuum, we should be at 109 hertz. So we'll see if the hertz reading from our scanner matches whatever the vacuum is on the scope, the real reading. So let's customize this. RPM, oxygen sensor map, TPS, engine coolant temp, idle air, short-term trim, open loop, closed loop. Let's look at those. Look at our map. Oh, and also let's put in that injector pulse width in there. So ECT Fahrenheit, it's reading 24. It is below freezing right now, so that's a little low. It should be closer to 30, but 6 degrees, not too concerned about that. And then intake air temps at 26, also close enough. So let's fire it up, see what happens. So we're at about 15 inches of vacuum and 115 hertz. So 115 is going to be, yep, so map sensor is reporting accurately. Fuel pressure is stable at 34 psi. That seems good. And it's running pig rich. You can tell. And our vacuum is getting worse. Now it's at 12. I'm going to give it some throttle. Improve that vacuum to 15. Look what our injector pulse width did. As the vacuum improved, it also dropped. Okay. So we'll save this data. Now what I want to do is, on the PCV system, I actually have it pinched off, the PCV valve over here. To rule that out, are we getting vacuum inside the crankcase? We are. How are we getting vacuum inside the crankcase when, now it's not strong, but if the PCV is pinched off, how are we getting vacuum inside the crankcase? It doesn't make any sense to me. There must be a leak between the intake manifold and the crankcase. I don't think that's normal. That would explain our symptoms. I'm sure of it. So we're running rich. So your vacuum's only 15. Raise the RPMs up a hair. Get it smoothed out a little bit. You see that injector pulse width, you're at 10, and at idle, it actually goes up to whatever, 20, and it stalls out. So now, I'm not suspecting bad compression really. I'm suspecting a leak between the intake manifold and the crankcase somehow. I don't know exactly how this manifold is designed. So that's very interesting findings. Alright, so I got a timing light. I pulled the spout connector out, and I don't know if the camera's going to pick this up. We're looking down there at the crank pulley, and it looks like about 12 degrees before top dead center. The owner actually painted a nice white line on there. That's on the money. Everything seems to be checking out. What else could cause this problem? Could this engine be out of time? Like when it was put together with the timing chain? That's the only other explanation I can find. I pinched off the PCV hose a little better, and we're actually getting a little bit of blow by, not much. So I'm actually not worried about excessive blow by. Like that's normal. We're not sucking vacuum in the crankcase. So the first time I checked that, I had a little dinky clamp on the PCV hose, and that wasn't helping anything. Is this engine out of time by like a tooth? We can put an in-cylinder pressure transducer in it. There's no other way to check. There's no cam and crank sensors, obviously. That's the only other thing I can think of. So, one thing I noticed about the engine vacuum, right now the truck's warmed up, it's a little more stabilized. We're at about 111 on the hertz, 110, 111. That's gonna be little, like 18 inches of vacuum. We should be around 21. And our scanner confirmed, or our scope confirms that we're about 17 inches of vacuum. If I raise the RPMs up slightly, the vacuum does not improve, meaning more vacuum. On any other engine, you'll see vacuum actually improve as the engine speeds up, but the throttle plate is just a hair open. And we can see that on our map sensor. We're not improving at all. We'll let it back down to an idle. We're at 110. That's as low as it gets. We should be at 100 or a little less, like 95. So the only other thing that can explain poor vacuum, you might ask, hey, maybe the EGR valve is stuck open. If there was excess air entering, the engine would just rev higher, it wouldn't be super rich. So last check you can do is the EGR valve, but I don't think it's the EGR valve because that pipe was not hot. Alright, so here's the EGR valve. The thermal camera, try to reduce the glare. Yeah, that pipe is a little warm. Now it is attached to the manifold, but is it flowing exhaust gas? Well, to have a conclusive experiment, let's unbolt it, put a block-off plate in there, and see how it runs. Alright, I got the EGR valve disabled. Just put in a soda can tin right in there, tighten up the nuts. Let's see what happens with our engine vacuum. Start our scope for 0. Graph our map. Oh, our vacuum is not dropping. It was not the EGR valve. Sorry. We're at about 16 to 17, still at 110 on the hertz. So engine vacuum is not proper, and there's our pulse width. Still going to be running rich. Oxygen sensors is heating up. Not good. So check this out. Once it dropped into closed loop here, boom, the injector pulse width dropped down to less than 5 milliseconds, minus 23%. We're just barely in fuel control, and it's running smoother, but engine vacuum is still poor. Raise the RPMs up a little bit. Now we're back to closed loop. Short term is going to drop. And look what our pulse width's going to do. 4.9, 4.6. .3. And now we're in fuel control. It still feels kind of rough because the plugs are probably fouled out. Engine vacuum is still poor, as we can see on our scope. It should be at about 21 inches of vacuum, not like 17. So I'm calling engine mechanical, not necessarily compression, but timing. Cam to crank. You can look up how to check these timing marks if there are any, or do an in-cylinder pressure transducer waveform. You'll see if the if the whole shebang, because it only has one camshaft, if everything's advanced or everything's retarded. I think that's my next check. All right, next test, cylinder pressure transducer. In cylinder number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I guess, with a lead on that plug wire, and the plug is grounded to the engine block over there. So I basically want to see A, where the ignition timing is, and B, what the waveform is inside the cylinder. So let's fire it up. I have the fuel injector disconnected on the cylinder right here, so it's not going to spray fuel in there. We'll just see compression. Alright, here we go. I actually left the vacuum in there just for kicks, so we're using 2 transducers. We see anything on our green channel. Okay, that'll be good enough. Stop that. Okay. There's our waveform. There's our vacuum pulse. And there's our ignition probe. Now, why is it occurring so early with respect to the compression tower? Very interesting. Let me get some cursors in here. I'll save this waveform and analyze it. So I did another capture, and with the spout connector installed, we're at about 30 degrees advanced on the spark before top dead center. Okay. I pulled the spout connector right here. You can see the vacuum decreased a little bit, so it got a little worse. And then let's look at right here, where's our ignition timing? It's closer to top dead center. So if we move the cursors over, and measure right here, about minus 20 degrees. So is this thing 10 degrees off over advanced? So what we could do is loosen up the distributor pinch bolt a hair, and then have the trigger on the compression stroke and just tweak it until we're down to 10 degrees. We could easily do that, you know, at idle. We want to be over here. Okay, so spark is definitely about 10 degrees over advanced from what I'm seeing with the spout connector unplugged. Now it runs, you know, the RPMs drop when you unplug the spout connector, and if we retard it even more, that probably wouldn't be good. This is a tough one. So base ignition timing is 10 degrees before top dead center. On our scope, now this is the spark line right here. Boom. So it starts right here. We're at 20. We should be at 10. We can try to adjust it one way or another and see what happens. Alright, so I retarded the timing by about 10 degrees. You can see first we were like at 120 hertz, then down to 113. And then I caught that on the scope. Right here's when I reinstalled the spout connector. So before, see, compression was higher, and our spark's actually occurring after top dead center, which is interesting. Reinstalled the spout connector, now we're occurring before top dead center. Okay, so I probably pushed it a little too far. We went the right way. Okay, that was interesting. Let's go back the other way. Alright, now I want the other way. So spout connector is unplugged. Start the scope again. Display our data. So now I advanced it from where it was. I don't think this is going to do much. So we're down to 112 vacuum. Alright, let me plug in the spout connector. Still runs like garbage. Did that change anything? Vacuum is still pretty poor. Let's pause that, see where we are on our timing. You know, we're way advanced now. I really don't know what to make of this. So I really don't know what to say about this. It doesn't look like we have any compression problems at all, because after the cylinder comes back down after the compression stroke, it's not any lower. Is it possible that it's leaking here and leaking on? Now let's see, that wouldn't make any sense. It's coming back down to exactly where it started, so it's not losing or gaining any air, right? It's under vacuum here, it's under pressure, and it's under vacuum again, and the exhaust valve opens. My question is the timing, the valve timing, is that spot on? Everything seems to be spot on. That looks pretty damn good. Exhaust valve opening, exhaust valve closing. Does it have a stock cam in here? I just don't know.